How's it going guys, Chris here. In this guide I'm going to be running over all the main console settings in the Dead Space Remake, giving you the general gist of what they all do and mean, and give some of my personal preferences along the way too. Though obviously you might want to tweak a few things to better optimise the settings for yourself. But before we jump into the guide, there's a couple of things you might want to do outside of the game to give you a better experience. The first being to make sure that HDR is enabled in your console settings, just to improve the picture quality, and the second being to make sure game mode is enabled in your TV settings, which just helps to reduce input lag and generally make the game feel more responsive. So anyway, hopping into the Dead Space settings, I'm just going to get the audio section out of the way with first, which shouldn't take too long. The first 4 tabs at the top are all volume related, with the first being the master volume controlling sound levels overall, and the 3 underneath being specific to music, dialogue and sound effects. I've chosen to lower the music setting just slightly, just so you can hear the other things a little bit clearer over the music, though leaving this at default will still probably be fine enough for most people, with all the tabs maxed out. Menu narration does what it says on the tin, a voice which basically reads the menu options for you. Most of you are going to have this off unless you struggle to read the menus. Audio channels basically optimises the sound depending on your setup, so for instance, if you're playing sound through your TV or dual speakers, you'll probably want to leave this on stereo. Put it on multi-channel if you play with a surround sound setup, and 3D audio if you have 3D audio compatible headphones. As for the mono output mode setting, I'd advise switching this one off, as it's basically going to merge all the sound and play it through individual speakers, rather than using those speakers all at once to give you directional sound, which in a game like this can be very important for immersion. Onto the control section now. The top tab lets you independently map your own control scheme if you want to customise it to your choosing. Most of you guys are probably going to be best leaving this alone, or choosing from the ready-made control presets just underneath. Now this is a pretty cool thing to be able to do, as you'll be able to switch the control scheme to the same original Dead Space layout from 2008, or switch it to Dead Space 2's layout from 2011 if you want, which might be handy if you've recently played those versions and have gotten used to those layouts, or if you just fancy playing the game like it was in the originals. With the controller layout tab, you can see the exact changes between these different control schemes, with one of the main differences being around how you sprint. The more modern default setting is arguably the better scheme that makes the most sense, just being slightly different to Dead Space 2's original layout, so most of you guys will probably want to leave this alone. Underneath this is the stick sensitivity, which would normally be much higher on other games, but is set at 0 from the start. I found that increasing this setting does make camera panning a little janky and inconsistent, so I've chosen to leave this at 0, which seems to make aiming and moving a bit smoother. The R2 and L2 sensitivity is left at 0 too, and I've also chosen to reduce the stick dead zone setting right the way down to 0 as well. In case you're wondering what this does, in layman's terms, lowering this basically increases your stick's responsiveness, meaning that as soon as you start to push the stick in a certain direction, this input will be registered sooner, which helps a lot when aiming when lowered. With that said, if you're getting any stick drifting issues, then this is going to be your main culprit, so in that case, you might want to bump the dead zone setting up just a tiny bit. Vibration I've reduced to 75%, just to keep things feeling immersive without having to put up with too much controller shaking. And under this is the camera Y-axis and X-axis speeds, which is mainly the thing that's going to impact your aiming and moving rather than the typical stick sensitivity. The Y-axis slider is for vertical speed, so up and down, and the X-axis speed is for horizontal, left and right. And I've actually increased these slightly to about 70%, just to make those camera pans and aiming feel a little bit snappier. Though if this is too much or not enough, I'd advise playing around with these to see what best suits you. In some other games, I'd probably recommend having the X-axis speed set slightly higher than the Y-axis, but because you're going to be aiming up and down more so to target specific necromorph limbs, you're probably best keeping these two sliders the same just for better consistency. And last of all here is the inverted camera option, which reverses the Y-axis. So pressing up on the thumbstick looks down, and pressing down looks up. Sounds a bit backwards, but if you're part of the Y-invert master race like myself, then this option is going to make the game feel natural to play. Moving over to the gameplay section now, right at the top you'll be able to pick your difficulty, which is pretty self-explanatory, though the story mode option is basically the easiest one, letting you breeze through the game without anything to really hold you back. Though if you're starting a new game, you'll also have the option to choose impossible mode, limiting you to 1 save and 1 life through a whole playthrough, which also just so happens to be set on hard too. Definitely not a mode for the faint of heart. Underneath difficulty, you'll find the single press QuickTime events, which basically just lets you win those QuickTime events much easier by pressing the button once, rather than having to mash it like mad. So if you can't be bothered doing those QuickTime events, then you might want to put this on. Sprint toggle lets you continue running after you've tapped the sprint button once, probably best left on unless you prefer holding it down instead. And the aim toggle under this is just the same thing, but applied when you're aiming your gun, which to most players will probably feel more natural toggled off instead. Log close mode lets you choose how to close the audio and text logs that appear on the screen. I've left this on hold. And under this is the automatic weapon swapping option, basically switching to your next gun automatically if you're all out of ammo with your current one. This might seem like a good idea, though I'd rather it didn't do this, as I can specifically pick the weapon I want to use rather than the game choosing for me, which might become problematic in some fights. A lot of you guys might want to have aim assistance on, and under this lets you further customize this setting to your own preference. The aim assist friction is essentially the slowdown effect that causes your sensitivity to become lower when your aim hovers over an enemy, which can generally be good for console players who might struggle to be precise, especially if they're playing with high camera pan speeds. The aim assist magnetism, however, has a bit more in common with the aim snap setting you'll see in other games, where the camera sort of pulls towards the enemy while aiming at them, making it easier to stay on target. And you can alter the effect strength of this setting with the slider just underneath. I tend to prefer leaving all of these aim assist settings off just to add a bit more of a challenge, though a lot of you guys will probably prefer to have them on, just to make aiming a little bit easier. It won't do all the work for you, but it'll definitely help. The Orient View to Locator Path option just points the camera in the right direction whenever you use the locator, which is basically that blue line on the floor that shows where your objective is. You'll probably want to leave this on just to make that feature more effective. Recenter View automatically moves the camera to its default central position if you don't move for a few seconds. This can be a bit annoying, so probably advise leaving this off. And the last two options in this section are linked with general button prompts and tutorials, with the input prompts letting you know what button you need to press to do certain things, and the tutorials popping up whenever there's something new in the game to be learnt. I turn both of these on, though if you already played the game and don't need those pop-up tutorials, this is where you can switch them off. Anyway, onto the graphics. The brightness setting is something you'll want to tune yourself, though if you've calibrated your HDR settings in the console properly, then around 50 is usually around where you'll probably want to leave it. Motion blur just adds a slight blur to fast movement. I've left this on but lowered it down to about 25%, just so it's only a small effect. Film grain is just a filter that's applied to your screen to add a bit of subtle noise to it. Doesn't really do anything to improve the picture in my eyes, so I tend to prefer turning this off. Colorblind mode lets you pick between a few options, which changes the hues to help colorblindness. I'd advise leaving this off if you aren't actually colorblind, as although some of these settings do brighten the image and make its visuals pop a bit more, it'll also give off a less natural looking picture in the process, which just might ruin the look and feel of certain scenes and environments. Though when switched on, the contrast of this effect can be altered with the slider underneath. And lastly in this section is the performance mode toggle. Basically switched on boosts the game to 60 FPS, while dropping the resolution down to 2K while disabling ray tracing. Though when switched off and left on the quality setting, the game's going to output a full fat 4K image complete with ray tracing, but drop the frame rate down to 30 FPS. If lower frame rates don't really bother you, then the quality mode makes the game look pretty nice with the best visual effects, though performance mode still looks fairly good too, while making the camera movement and combat feel super smooth. So a lot of people are going to prefer to use that instead, sacrificing a bit of sharpness and visual fidelity for a smoother experience. So the last main settings section you'll find is the accessibility tab, which just helps with ease of use and helps to counter some problems that some people might run into. So aside from the menu narration and colorblind settings at the top, which we've already highlighted in other sections, you'll find a few tabs below to customize what you'll see in the game. Show content warning and hide disturbing scenes are there to basically hide away some of the gorier scenes and warn the user that something disturbing is about to happen in the game. You could argue that this sort of takes away the fun, and the whole point of playing an M-rated horror game, though a few people might want to have these on if they can't handle the gore in the game. Though to be honest, they probably shouldn't be playing a game like Dead Space in the first place if they need to have these on. Just saying. Now there's a bunch of settings underneath this that we've already brushed over in the other sections, though a new one you'll find hiding somewhere in the middle is the map zoom mode. Now when left at hold, you'll need to hold the back trigger and then use the D-pad to zoom in and out of your map. Though when toggle selected, you can toggle this zoom mode on and off rather than holding the trigger. Just something that you might want to change, though I've gotten used to the hold option with that being on from the start. If the pause menu swaying around annoys you, then that can be toggled off to keep it static here. Show Kinesis symbol just displays the symbol when you aim your gun to show it can be used. I've just left this on for extra HUD information. and the show persistent dot option just sticks a big dot in the centre of your screen, which might help some people who get a bit disoriented by camera movements. Below this are all the subtitle options, which are fairly self-explanatory, just the on-screen text that can be read when characters speak. I have subtitles off, though if you have them on, you can customise how they look on screen by playing around with these tabs and sliders. And last of all is the camera shake option, which I've turned on just to help add a little bit more immersion. So those are the Dead Space settings you'll find on console. This guide was made using a PS5, though Xbox will also have similar sort of settings too, just with different buttons. Hope the video helped you out, give me a like if it did, and thanks for watching.